An English immigrant sign painter named Thomas Young and his wife Elmina welcomed Thomas Young Jr. April 2nd, 1928 in Ogden, Utah. From early on, and starting with his siblings, Tom would spend a life dedicated to family, holding a strong testimony, sharing his faith, teaching the values of honesty and business, and not to forget his lifelong appreciation of a well-done sign.
Your friends would say to you, "Oh, I noticed that new sign you just put up, and I sold that."
With all that, he also knew how to play the piano and blow a pretty good trumpet in his younger years, and to keep the music playing throughout all of his life. It's a story that starts with his artist father falling in love with a young Ogden woman, Elmina Carlisle. Their Salt Lake Temple wedding was sealed in 1916. Tom was the fifth of their 6 children.
I was kind of the fair-haired boy. I was number 5 in the family and the first son. I had 4 older sisters. And then along came Tom Jr., and oh boy, I was kind of treated that way my whole life. The fair-haired boy, and anything Dad needed, he usually turned right to me to get it done.
The family moved to Salt Lake City when Tom was 9 years old and into the house on Normandy Circle. Now, having an electric sign company owner in their midst certainly brightened up the neighborhood during the holidays. 9-year-old Tom was now old enough to start learning the lesson that hard work pays off.
The move from Ogden was a big deal. He came as a fairly young man, and he remembers having to paint the home on Normandy Circle, and there was so much painting, he said he wore the paintbrush out.
The backyard was lined with Chinese elm trees, and nothing but twigs. My whole youth was picking up twigs in the backyard.
But of course, it wasn't all hard work. The young house was always full of music, with a piano in the front room. And good music. His mother was an accomplished musician. She was known as a Yale Ward recital favorite. His father was equally talented. He played the organ beautifully. Tom followed his parents' musical skills. You see, it was music that helped make him popular at East High, and it was music he brought to the University of Utah. Most importantly, it was music that later led him to a special teenager across town, Dwan Jacobson. Dwan came from a different Salt Lake neighborhood in high school. She was the daughter of Clifton and Vonna Jacobson. Her dad ran the popular Gem grocery store in the Avenues. Dwan was not only a good citizenship award winner at South High, she was a very good pianist, and the high schooler was invited to play with the university orchestra one day.
Mom was a tremendous student, very popular, loved people, very social.
Tom knew she was pretty special, but as a shy teen, he didn't act on this for a while. He started playing with Murray Jones and his orchestra.
After the war, 40s, 50s, big band type music, and the trumpet played a really important role in the big band, and he was playing the trumpet.
They were some of the hottest musicians around town. They played all the big gigs, including Salt Air. No place was bigger. And Tom noticed the special pianist was often dancing in the crowd with her date. The shy trumpeter would anonymously dedicate songs for her that the band leader would announce, much to the chagrin of Dwan's dates.
They would dedicate a number to me. And my date would say, "Oh, did you request a number tonight?" I said, "No." "Did you?" "No."
So you could imagine what her date thought when there was a song dedicated to Dwan. And so this went on, as we understand it, a number of times.
So I realized that the only consistent thing was the orchestra. the band. It was a big band. It was a big 20-piece band. So anyway, that's how we connected.
Our mother is a high quality Class A woman, and he saw that.
Of course, Dwan's parents must have wondered a little about this new musician. Was he just using the oldest excuse ever in why he was getting their daughter home at a late hour?
The idea of my mother going out with a guy from the band horrified and really worried my mother's parents. And one night, my father actually ran out of gas on a date. And my grandmother was in her slippers and her robe out on the corner of 7th East and Kensington Avenue, waiting for them to come around the corner, just worried sick that my mother was never coming home again.
However, there was no doubt Tom knew how to have a good romantic date.
Often our date was to go and we did sign patrol. Now that meant that he gave me a notebook with a pencil, and then we would drive around the city and we would find the signs that needed service, and I would notate. He didn't have a lot of money, and so it was a nice, inexpensive date.
Of course, Tom Young knew that there was also a higher calling for him about that time. He eagerly awaited his mission call.
He was so excited when he opened his letter, and it said England, because that's where Tom Sr. was born, of course, and so that would have been his first choice.
So in 1948, Elder Thomas Young Jr. was starting his life in the mission field. He found an old high school friend on that British mission. They would do missionary work together, and that friend would become the beloved Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints General Authority, President M. Russell Ballard.
East High School. We were both young guys then, and we had a wonderful friendship at East High, and then we went on to the university, but where I got to know Tom best was in the mission field. And the great day when Tom was transferred into the Nottingham district and we worked together. We were missionary companions. We did not full time, but we did do missionary work together. He was a wonderful missionary. To my knowledge, all of those who served with him as his companions, they all had great respect and appreciation for Tom.
President Ballard has always admired Tom Young's strong testimony.
Tom has a very deep, abiding testimony of the restoration of the gospel. And wherever he went, he made a tremendous difference.
Tom came back from his mission with 3 things on his mind. Of course, one was to talk about his mission work. One Ogden ward asked that he demonstrate a typical street meeting in England. The other 2 things occupying his mind were the Young Electric Sign Company and, of course, Dwan. She waited for him, but certainly kept busy. She was University of Utah royalty. She was a thespian, and she continued in her music. But the big moment came when they became engaged on Christmas Eve 1950. It was a newsworthy event. They were quite the couple. Once when Dwan chaired a sock hop dance, the newspaper wrote that she and her fiancé, Tom Young, made double sure all couples checked their shoes at the door. Their marriage was sealed in the Salt Lake Temple, June 22nd, 1951. Now, this was no small wedding. They planned the reception for 6 months, and photo after photo shows many were in the party. One of the ushers was his good friend, M. Russell Ballard.
He married over his head when he married Dwan, and that helped him, just like I did. I think we've got to give our wives a lot of credit for what we've accomplished in our lifetimes.
When we were first married, we were very anxious to have a big family. And so it took a little while for the family to get started, but we were so grateful as each of our family members came, so we're thankful to have 5 children.
And wow, what a marriage they've had. What a marriage they've had.
Of course, by now, the newly married Tom had returned to the Young Electric Sign Company. It would be the fulfillment of yet another wonderful dream of the early 1950s.
I knew from the time I was a small boy what I wanted to do in life, and I wanted to go into the business with my dad.
It was a deep bond between father and son.
I think he followed the example of his dad. His dad never retired. His dad worked until he passed away. And there was a special relationship between Tom and his father.
I think one great secret that happened, one of the great things that happened in the history of the company with my father was he was following an example of his dad.
Saying Dad had always, don't lie, when honesty will serve you better.
He was not a new employee. His dad had made sure Tom had part-time jobs all while he was growing up. He knew the business from the ground floor, starting from day one.
Here's a broom, here's a dustpan, this is Pop Soaper. You do whatever he tells you to do, start sweeping. And I did metal work. I did electrical work in the shop, as I was growing up. And when I graduated from sweeping floors, I physically worked on some of these signs.
And so slowly but surely, my grandfather handed over task by task, responsibility by responsibility over to my father. And he slowly and ultimately took over every aspect of the business.
Tom had learned quite a few of the jobs by the time he was back from his mission and after his marriage. During World War II, a number of the employees had gone off to war. Tom was not old enough to have been a soldier, so he filled many holes at work.
World War II hit us like a brick. The draft was very active, and a lot of our people who were working for us got drafted. And so we lost most of our workers to World War II, except those who were overage. And like me, I was underage and couldn't go to war, and I worked in most of the production departments all along the way.
While he wasn't in the war, he did train for the military, starting from his days in high school ROTC, and then enlisting twice in the Army Reserve immediately after his marriage. He used his experience as a funny, catch-all explanation for anything extraordinary.
He'll do something special, and they'll say, Dad, where did you learn that? And he said, oh, I learned it in the Army. But he didn't learn much about anything like that, but he says it all the time.
He did bring his personality to work right away, and his hobby, photography. While learning job after job at work, he convinced his father to have photos taken of every new sign.
With his creativity and his vision, he decided the company needed a pictorial history of the signs that were being built.
And including that marvelous video of the creation of an installation of the Mint in Las Vegas. And we wouldn't have had that footage if my father hadn't just been there at the request of my grandfather.
Oh, it was an exciting time for Tom. The outside world saw the Young Electric Sign Company helping develop an American post-war urban landscape, including the shaping of Las Vegas and one of Tom's favorites, the Mint.
The Mint was all self-contained. The structure itself was like a railroad bridge to go up that high. And there's this light bulb display would start down here, nothing, and go, and then up the vertical. As it would come up the vertical, the starburst would go with a great big bright light right in the middle of it. That was probably my favorite sign of all times.
The favorite sign of all times?
Yeah, that's my opinion.
But always paramount in Tom's world were 6 other people, Dwan and 5 wonderful children in a home that was all about values. Perhaps one of the first values all the children remembered was simply known as the ledger.
He had a ledger for each of the children, and then he listed all of the household tasks that were available.
And based on what labor we performed around the house, this would be common chores around the house, we were then compensated for that work.
One of the ways that I earned money as a child was to shine shoes, my dad's shoes. He taught me how to shine his shoes, and I would get 25 cents a pair.
They gave us jobs, and then as we earned our money, we would simply log them in a ledger, and they always kept cash in the drawer in their bedroom.
It was a lesson, an amazing lesson in trust that they had for us, because the money was there for the taking.
The ledger value has now reached new generations of the family. It was all part of Tom Jr.'s joy of being a father.
Dad was a very successful businessman, and he had a lot of responsibilities. And I'm sure he had a lot of pressures at work, but he left it at work. And I felt like when he was home, he was there for us.
I remember him teaching me how to ride a bike and teaching me how to tie my shoes, and he always had a good way to do things, whatever it was.
My relationship with my father, probably not unlike my siblings, is really interesting because he never really had strong expectations for us. The relationship was one of care and love and concern. And so when things would happen, it wasn't as if he demanded it and we achieved something. The achievement or the satisfaction that he felt was just being our father and us being his children.
I feel so blessed to have been born to be his daughter.
Whenever I was with him, I always felt like I was special, and that I always knew that he loved me.
And Dwan's joy of being a mother.
I don't remember ever feeling like I was neglected in favor of one of my other siblings. I felt like she filled the bucket 100% for me, and that continues to this day.
When I think of my mom, I think of the word faithful. She's faithful to whatever it is that she does. She's faithful to her family, faithful to her children, faithful to God.
If I were to think of one word for Dwan, it would be energy. And everyone talks about Energizer Buddy with her. She just will not stop. And she is just go, go, go.
She is the type of person that whoever she meets, and that's including the children, she makes you feel like you're the most important person in the world. And it'd be very easy for any one of us, I'm sure, to say, I'm her favorite.
She just gives and gives and gives. And she is so humble and so willing to serve and bless other people.
Having parents like Tom and Dwan was certainly a blessing to the kids. They were quite the team. And of course, everything was ratcheted up when it became time for the holidays.
I have very happy memories of Christmas when we were children. They were so magical and special.
Dad and Mom made it just an abundance when we would wake up Christmas morning and go in, and the living room was just full of presents and things that we asked for and things that we didn't ask for. I remember one Christmas we got unicycles, and so there was always a surprise.
I did hear rumor that my brothers would wake up extra early and sneak in and see, but of course I never did that.
Paul and I would scheme and connive to see if we could figure out what the presents were and try to find out where the hiding places were. And occasionally we would even sneak up there in the middle of the night to see what Mom and Dad had prepared.
My parents have a great tradition of getting together on Christmas Eve, and one of the highlights is they bought pajamas for all of us. All the grandkids, all of my siblings, every single year, pajama bottoms and t-shirts that said Bear Lake Bunch.
We love getting together, and we have a dinner, and then we have a musical program. So everyone has an opportunity.
We have a little mini family recital every year at Christmas, which has been such a fun tradition.
Tom was always a mentor to his friends and family, among them his late nephew, Bill Goodfellow.
Bill wouldn't be the man he is if it hadn't been for Tom. Tom and Dwan sort of took him over after his parents were divorced. Bill didn't have a father who was there to help him, and Tom became a father to him. I am grateful to Tom for everything he was to me, but if he were nothing to me, I would be grateful to him for what he was to Bill, because he was everything to Bill.
Susie will always remember Tom's compassion and help after Bill passed away.
He remembered our anniversary, he remembered Bill's birthday, and he'd always call me on those days and say, I was just thinking about Bill today. He taught me all kinds of things that make me a better person. He taught me how to put the family first no matter what. He taught me how to be aware of what other people need and then to step in and do it.
Family life also meant Tom and Dwan mentoring about parenting.
Dad and Mom never disciplined with anger or fear. They did it with love.
They would help each other in all things. If one was busy doing something, then the other would take over, and I think they did a really good job of cooperating to raise our family and to take care of the children.
I have always felt valued. I've always felt like I meant something. And I think that in large measure, that comes from parenting. But I know my four siblings feel the same way. We all feel like we mean something and we're valued. And we're told that they tell us, even today.
And not only are Tom and Dwan great parents, they are also simply wonderful grandparents.
Mom and Dad have been wonderful grandparents to our children, and they all love them dearly. They're a very important part of their lives.
My parents are, as grandparents, almost as attentive as they were as parents, amazingly. Especially my mom. She goes about attending soccer games.
And as a grandmother, you can't believe what she does. She is committed to go shopping with every grandchild, and now every great-grandchild in the family.
They remember their birthdays, they have a calendar that they keep track, and they try to make that day special for them by calling them on the phone.
So I have a lot of very fond memories of my grandpa growing up as a boy before I was a part of the company and spending that quality time really learning from him.
Of course, marriage was at the foundation of all eternal families.
My parents are incredible examples of love and devotion. They truly love each other and want to spend time with each other and be together in everything they do.
I've always sensed togetherness and closeness with my parents, and one of the secrets they've shared with us is they've always had something planned. And in a lot of cases it was travel or trips or excursions of some kind, but always gave them something to look forward to.
I have been striving throughout my life to be the kind of husband that I saw my father be. And he is an exemplary husband. I don't remember a single instance of hearing him speak negatively or criticize my mom.
Over the years when I was in the home, and I'd observe little things that they'd do together, and it was always done with so much love. Even if Dwan said to Tom, do you want to use a knife to cut the meat? You could tell that she loved him.
And they were just always good at cooperating because they loved each other, and so they would do things to help each other.
I'm sure they had disagreements, we all do, but they worked it out together, and there was no contention. There was just joy and happiness and love between them. And in their later years, it has been so wonderful to watch them care for one another in their difficult challenges with health and other issues that they have faced.
What an incredible example for me and for all of us as a family to see that total devotion to one another.
The young family and faith always went together as they defined each other.
We grew up with two parents who are totally devoted to God. They are very, very firmly entrenched and have strong testimonies.
Tom had a great faith in the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. It showed in how he served, it showed in how he behaved, it showed in how he managed.
Dad is a man of faith. He is such a great example of a Christ-like person who is always looking out to help other people and so very generous. And our home was full of faith, and our home was full of the Spirit. One of my earliest memories is when we would kneel down for family prayer every night. As little children, we would kneel down.
And we would repeat. It was always a prayer that we would repeat. So whomever was saying the prayer would say the words, and then all of the children would repeat.
As I've grown older, I've learned to understand the level of my father's faith, and it's not just a matter of him expressing his convictions, it's in his actions. He was one who was always there to volunteer and to receive assignments and to follow through with assignments with great gusto, and it continues to today.
I was up at the house for dinner one Sunday night, and I said to Tom, I'm having eye surgery this next week. Do you think you could give me a blessing? And he said, yeah, I'll run across the street and get another brother to come over, and we'll do it. And here they came. And this was how he was.
It's immeasurable to try to say what value the church and faith has had on them, on their lives, on our lives, and the happiness that we've had.
It's so wonderful to see our children now raising their children in the same way and teaching them and having family home evening with them. And it all goes back to Mom and Dad and the foundation that we had.
What more could parents want? To have their children be righteous and be obedient and serve.
Faith was not only a personal practice in the young household, both Tom and Dwan never hesitated to cheerfully support each other in church callings.
When my mother was called as the primary general president for the church, which made her responsible for all the children throughout the world, which is an amazing responsibility. And my father was there by her side the whole time.
The challenge on those general officers is unbelievable, and the support that comes from their companions is unbelievable as well. The quiet, unsung heroes.
In our worldwide church responsibilities, he was just the guy to carry the luggage. And then my mom, by the same token, has always been incredibly supportive of my dad.
I watched my father, who was the center of the universe at work, as my mother increased in her responsibility and authority in her job with the church. I watched my father completely transition to a support role.
And I think one of the neat things about both of them is they are both totally comfortable with one or the other being in the limelight and having the responsibility in that and being this support person in the back.
Now, of course, not all travel was church or business related. There was travel to their beloved Bear Lake. Oh, it was magic. It was where the family amplified every good moment that they ever had together. How could a cabin be a place to further cement an already close family? Perhaps Tom and Dwan knew the secret. It was because they all worked to make it with their own hands.
We bought a little farmhouse in 1961 at Bear Lake, and it was just a two-room, one bath little farmhouse, but it had a nice big piece of property.
It was where my dad taught us how to water ski. I remember him he would get up on his big red water skis, I remember.
It was a place where we had so much fun as a family and recreated.
And when you're there overnight and eating these meals together and doing these activities together and also working together.
That has been the laboratory, because they have learned everything from plumbing to carpentry,
painting fences or weeding the yard or getting the docks set up.
We learned to use a chainsaw. We learned to use a wrench. We learned to use sockets. We learned to use saws.
All of those things have just brought us closer.
Early on, so this is the early 60s, he decided we needed a flagpole. So we went up in the Jeep up the canyon and we found a lodge pole. We cut the tree down, brought the tree back to the cabin. He bought a large tire. We hand mixed concrete and that became our flagpole. And that is still there at Bear Lake to this day.
There's no greater joy that he's shared with me, no greater joy than to watch his children there enjoying each other and bonding together as a family. It's heaven on earth for all the reasons. And my dad has poured his heart and soul into that property.
Tom might have left some business pressures behind, but there was never a vacation from the faith that always directed family life.
We would be out on the lake playing on all the other days of the week that we were there, but on Sundays we would go to church.
Sunday was the Sabbath, and so it was a totally different. We weren't out on the lake, we weren't boating, we would go to church.
And while Bear Lake was always in the forefront, there were some pretty wonderful vacations to other places too. But it was not just the locations, it was because they were shared with family.
Probably the one that was most memorable for me was when we went back east with all 5 children and Mom and Dad, and we piled into a station wagon.
The trip, we loaded all in the car when Mike was 16 and I was 14, and loaded in the car and drove across the entire country, and just had a marvelous time together.
And it was a noteworthy trip for me because I had just gotten my driver's license. And being the oldest child, I was given the opportunity to drive this station wagon with all 7 of us, which, I don't know. You talk about trusting me. My parents trusted me to drive.
We strapped this little television in the front of our station wagon so that we could be entertained while we were driving. So he was ahead of the times back then.
He loved going to New York and seeing the signs. Well, it's just part of his DNA, that's all.
And getting there was half the fun. Tom was a skilled pilot and loved flying.
Tom realized that he needed to get a small plane to get to all the small units in the western area. So his dad would say, Tom, where are we going this week? Where are we going this week? He loved to fly.
As early as I can remember, flying with our dad, and we flew to various places, most noteworthy, a couple of places. We flew to Lake Powell a little bit, but most importantly, we flew to Disneyland. We flew down to Southern California.
It was so fun to be with him in the air and to see him in that element. He was so good at it. And it's really kind of funny because I grew up being on that little plane and I felt totally comfortable, completely safe.
My siblings trusted him implicitly to fly us.
When it gets turbulent, when it gets rough, he said, just close your eyes and pretend like you're on the boat. And you're on Bear Lake and in the rough water, and you won't be frightened. And so I did that.
However, while much was new, there were some treasured joys from the past too. Of course, one was music. In fact, the much-beloved organ at the house that was once played by Tom Sr. and now by Tom Jr. and Dwan will no doubt be played by generations to come.
We had an organ in our basement, and Dad would go down and play the organ.
And he would sit down and just play by ear. He never had music, and he could just play the most beautiful music.
And my mother's down there all the time because she's playing for church regularly and has been doing so for decades upon decades upon decades.
I remember laying in bed, trying to go to sleep, and I remember my dad in the other room playing the organ. I can just see to this day his fingers moving across the keys. And most notably, my memory is of him playing Greensleeves. And it's a memory from my childhood, laying there, and it's a deer. It's a dear piece of music.
Now, he couldn't carry the organ around, but that did not mean that Tom was without music. Just ask any of the children of several generations. He seemed to always have a harmonica with him.
Wherever they are, we call them on their birthdays, and we'll either sing, and then he always gets his harmonica and plays Happy Birthday. They love that.
It's hard to think about Grandpa Young without thinking about Grandpa Young's harmonica, and particularly that singing Happy Birthday.
And they would sing, and Dad would play the harmonica, wishing us a happy birthday. And when they sing, of course, Dad would sing the harmony.
And it became really an expectation for people here at the office when they had their birthday that they could hear Tom play the harmonica.
I mean, anyone who sat and been serenaded by him on his harmonica for a birthday will never forget it.
Oh yes, music. It was and is one of the constants in the family.
It's clear to say without music, our family would never have come to be.
There was always music in our home, it seemed, whether it was my mom playing the piano or we would sing together as a family.
We were all encouraged to learn musical instruments, and Dad, bless his heart, he paid for all those lessons.
Our daughters, both of them, play the piano beautifully, and our sons as well are musical.
They bought me a small cornet to use, and then when I got in high school, I actually used my father's old trumpet.
My dad was good enough to be a career musician, and that musical skill really came from his parents.
I consider myself quite musical, and I look back on my life, and I should be down there directing the Utah Symphony, or I should have. I could have. I was musical enough that I could have done that.
I was sitting in Rotary one day and they announced that Tom was going to get up and lead the music. And I was sitting at his table. And he got up and he led the music, and when he finished, he came down, sat at the table, and I looked at him and I said, "Tom, you had a baton to lead the music." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Was that a chopstick?" He said, "Yeah, actually it was. It was the one thing that fit into my pocket." And he always brought a chopstick so that he was prepared to lead the music.
Another constant was Tom's generosity.
He is generous with his time, with his money. There was never a time where I felt like I couldn't go to him for anything, and even at times when I didn't need something, he would always ask me if there was anything that I needed.
He has willingly accepted calls as they have come, and he's fulfilled them and done the best he knew how to fulfill them.
I've never seen him look for the limelight or even a thank you for all of the good that he does, but he's a tremendous strength to this community and to those of us that have known him.
Whether it's building a building, a youth trip, a breakfast, any volunteer activity at all, he's right in the middle of it and willing to take on those assignments.
And my dad must have been assigned to take care of the soft drinks. So he didn't just bring the soft drinks. He got a Yesco pickup truck, lined the bed with plastic, and then put the drinks in and filled the whole thing back up with ice.
One thing about Dad is he always went the extra mile.
He would just go out of his way to go past the ordinary to make everything unique and special.
And part of that generosity was Tom's building skills. As the family, the ward, and everyone around him knew, Tom was a builder. why he could and would build about anything for anyone.
He's not only a musician, a photographer, he builds things with woodwork, he's made signs.
I always loved when my dad was down in his workshop. We could hear the saw going, and to this day, the smell of sawdust, I always think of my dad.
Down in his wood shop, he used to make airplanes out of old Coke cans, and I was fascinated with how he would go about turning Coca-Cola cans into airplanes.
He is a master at building things, making things, fixing things.
He's a builder, and one of the great projects, ongoing projects, has been to build these water ski docks.
I have in my possession things that he made and gave to all 5 of us for Christmas. For instance, he made little stools for us that we could stand on.
He also passed along his love of photography to the kids.
I remember going out with our cameras and looking at different scenery and trying to capture the beauty of the scenery around us, and he would guide us and show us how to use our cameras.
We have emphasized Tom's new family, Dwan, which was not quite so new by the late 1960s. There was, of course, the older generation. Tom's father died in 1971. Tom always made sure his mother was taken care of tenderly and kindly.
Tom really did look after her for many, many years. It was maybe 18 years that she was a widow, and Tom took care of her during that time.
And my dad was there for her virtually every day, every week, every month. And to watch him care for her is a great example of us of how we should be treating our family members. And it's tender.
Those values, of course, carried into what many called his second family, the Yesco family. Tom would become president of Yesco in 1968.
I wanted to build the company into a good big company. I made the comment once. I didn't particularly want to be the biggest sign company in the world, but it wouldn't hurt.
It was an amazing time of growth, but a time when the large company still maintained the close relationships that existed in the days of Pop Soper. Tom was the kind of boss everyone wishes they could have.
I always admired him. He is not an elitist man. He is willing to do anything and everything to make the thing go right.
I think Tom projects goodness. He's an obviously moral and honorable man.
He had an incredible ability to see people who had great capability, and then he hired them, and then he just treated them like gold.
Treating other people with kindness was just his nature, and I think that people respond to that.
Working for Tom Young, with Tom Young, you never worked for him, you always worked with him. And he had a way of motivating you that felt gracious. You never felt like he was pushing you, but you always felt like he was helping you do the very best you could.
He was just a consistent type gentleman, and very humble and very generous.
He was more like a brother to me than a boss. And his management style and his charisma and his attitude was just fantastic. He was easy to follow.
The humility that he has and the quiet servant leadership that he exhibited was something that I admire tremendously.
He could pick people that could get the job done, and he would allow them to do it without restrictive oversight. So I probably appreciate that more than any other aspect of Tom Young Jr.
You imagine working for someone who cares more about you than the organization, and it puts you in a position where you want to do anything for him.
And one could see why it was a close-knit company that just happened to stretch coast to coast and beyond. Tom never forgot the beauty of a sign, even an old one. Once a reporter asked him about Wendover Will in Wendover, Nevada. Tom happily jumped into the plane and flew out to meet the reporter on the Nevada border.
It was very ambitious. It was big, it was mechanized, and for a long time, it was the largest mechanized sign anywhere.
By the 1980s, his children were involved in the value-driven business. There was no doubt that this would always be a family business, even as a giant company.
One of the most meaningful conversations I had with my father is we were driving east on 9th South, and we stopped at the stoplight on 7th East, and he turned to me and he said, I was 15, and he said, your mother and I are gonna stop paying for your clothes. You're on your own, you're gonna have to buy your own clothes. And I said, I wasn't like, well, why aren't you paying for my clothes? I said, oh, I need to work more than the ledger. I need to get a job. Who can I talk to? And he said, well, you know, if you want to go talk to Gary in the office, you're free to do that. But yeah, and that was the end of it. And that started my career. And that's all he said.
I worked at Yesco just when I was in high school, part-time, and it was a great experience. I did a lot of filing and just helping one of the secretaries there.
I remember going into the office and filing and putting material slips in order and doing those sorts of things.
One of the jobs I had was we printed out tons of computer-generated reports, and they were old reports. And so I guess paper shredders maybe weren't invented, or we certainly didn't have one. So my job was to go out to the dumpster and right up to the dumpster and rip papers off and dump them in the dumpster.
And Dad said to me, doesn't that feel good? Just to work a good day's work and to get paid for it. Isn't that a good feeling? And I remember thinking, it really is.
And just as he was 40 years before, he was again excited to be called on a mission, this time with Dwan. It would be in Calgary, Canada in 1988.
When the mission call came, he hoped it would be England, but it was almost England. Canada was almost England, so we had enough of England there.
They developed what ended up being hundreds and hundreds of children, if you will. I mean, they loved and appreciated and respected every one of their missionaries as much as they loved and respected us.
And it was so wonderful to watch them do that and serve together.
I remember going to Calgary when my parents were serving their mission and really being amazed at the work that they were doing. My dad especially is able to relate to young people so well.
We loved our mission. We loved serving. He was a fabulous mission president.
I remember hearing stories from their missionaries about how they loved Tom and Dwan as mission presidents there, and what a great job that they did.
Once again, it was Tom and his driven values.
His missionaries loved him, and they still do. They have so many missionaries that continue to keep in contact with them and call and ask for advice.
One thing that I always loved was sometimes when I'd be up there for dinner on Sunday evening, someone would come to the door and it would be one of his missionaries that he hadn't seen for years, who was just happened to be coming through Salt Lake and remembered him and wanted to stop by and say hello. And that's how he was. Everyone would remember him.
He loved those missionaries, and they knew that he loved them. And so they worked their hearts out. They worked their hearts out for him.
The letter releasing the young states, "You retire from your present position with our utmost confidence, goodwill, and appreciation." It is signed by the First Presidency, President Ezra Taft Benson, President Gordon B. Hinckley, and President Thomas S. Monson. The Calgary mission time was also a turning point for the business.
Signs are important because they let people know that something's happening. The human eye, I think, likes to see action, likes to see light.
The next generation was now in charge.
So it happened very abruptly, but it was short of somebody passing away. It was a very soft landing because the onus primarily fell on my brother Mike to run the business. But my father was a phone call away if there were an emergency.
Dad sat me down and asked me if I would be willing to take his position in the company.
And he had Michael and Paul and Jeff, all three sons were working in the business. So we just packed up. Tom said, "You've got it, go for it." And so we left and they took over and it flourished.
Thomas Young Jr. continued to be blessed and blessed others as a businessman, a family man, a humanitarian, and a worthy and good Latter-day Saint. However, you see, Thomas Young Jr. never really changed throughout any of his life. His values just grew stronger and reached more people.
Probably my inner desire to be me, my company, my family, everything around me needed to be better today than it was yesterday.
In recent years, my dad has said to me, "Have I done enough? You know, I don't feel like I've done enough." And how to tell him that he's done enough. I think he's so humble. He doesn't realize the impact that he has had on everyone around him, he and my mom.
As was summarized at the start of this reflection, Tom did spend a life dedicated to family, holding a strong testimony, sharing his faith, teaching the values of honesty in business. Oh, and he never forgot his lifelong appreciation of a well-done sign, especially when the signs had to come down.
Absolutely, it hit us right, just like being stabbed in the heart. Yes, yes. Like the death of a friend, you know.
So what should future family members know about Tom and Dwan from all those who knew and loved them?
Know of their devotion and their goodness and their integrity and their life of really humble servant and being humble servants and hard work. They're just two devoted, hardworking, humble people.
Tom and Dwan truly set the example for how to live a good life.
Our hope is that our values, our example, that we've instilled with our children, they are now instilling with their children. And our hope and dream is that it will continue.
Knowing Tom and Dwan as I do, I think the book of life is full of those kindnesses that no one will know on this side of the veil, but where they've made a difference in lives one at a time.
It was just seemed like it was his nature that he always wanted to do more. I don't know what the motivation was other than just to be more like the Savior.
With his family, with his church, with Yesco, with the community. It was love and service. It was love, commitment, and hard work.
All five of us have talked about faith growing up and the faith of our parents, and scriptures play a critical role in that. And I remember before I went to England on my mission, my dad sat me down and we went through section 121 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which is one of his, I'm sure one of his favorites, as it is mine, and it's been a great source of truth and direction for me in my life, and it applies to all phases of life, including work. And so I'd like to just read some of the verses that we went over. We have learned by sad experience that it is the nature and disposition of almost all men, as soon as they get a little authority, as they suppose, they will immediately begin to exercise unrighteous dominion. Hence many are called, but few are chosen. No power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood, only by persuasion, by long-suffering, by gentleness and meekness, and by love unfeigned, by kindness and pure knowledge, which shall greatly enlarge the soul without hypocrisy and without guile, reproving betimes with sharpness when moved upon by the Holy Ghost, and then showing forth afterwards an increase of love toward him whom thou hast reproved, lest he esteem thee to be his enemy.
It's been a wonderful, wonderful, exciting trip for me, my life. That's the way I describe my life. It's been a great ride, a lot of learning, things to do, and yes, it's been fun.